All right. Well, hello and welcome to the Chicago Asthma Consortium's Ask an Expert series, where we have our community engagement committee shared here, and we'll introduce who the players are here. And we've invited some experts from the field, if you will, of different people who advocate for persons specifically. Our focus today is around persons with asthma and those who happen to be renters, whether they're renting houses or apartments throughout Chicago. The reason that we've gathered here is because CAC collaborated with the Illinois Department of Public Health to create a checklist of environmental concerns that persons with asthma or tenants should consider, whether they're looking for someplace new to live or they already are renters. Part of that collaboration included MTM and the experienced work of community health workers. And so what we'd like to do is moving forward, we'll go ahead and, oh, first of all, did I say who I am? I'm sorry. My name is Crystal Stevenson, and I'm the board president of the Chicago Asthma Consortium, and I co-chair the Community Engagement Committee with Dr. Sharmili Nineheis. And so with that being said, I'm going to have Sharmili chime in to bring in our experts.
Great. Thank you, Crystal. Again, my name's Sharmili Nineheis. I am a practicing allergist and a faculty member at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and also a board member, or actually recently past board member of the Chicago Asthma Consortium. And I am a co-chair with Crystal on the Community Engagement Committee for the CAC. So we have been able to have some excellent and very knowledgeable experts for this Ask the Expert series. And so I would like for everyone to introduce themselves. Let's start off with Susan Theis.
Yes, my name is Susan Tice, and I'm a housing attorney at Legal Aid Chicago. Legal Aid Chicago. We just changed our name, and sometimes I trip over it. Legal Aid Chicago is a group of lawyers who provide legal services for very low income folks who would not otherwise have access to legal services. My practice is specifically geared towards tenants who suffer a variety of difficulties at the hands of unfair or landlords who are not fulfilling their obligations, including obligations with respect to keeping housing in a fit and habitable condition. So I have a lot of experience in helping people, helping tenants require their landlords, work with their landlords, and press their landlords to meet the obligations that they already have under existing Chicago ordinances.
Great, thank you. Laura Garcia from Metropolitan Tenants Organization.
Everyone, thank you for allowing us to join this panel. My name is Laura Garcia. I work with Metropolitan Tenants Organization. We focus on empowering tenants and advocating for them as well. I am the Healthy Homes organizer, so I advocate that when tenants are living in unsafe conditions. I'm also the facilitator for Patch, which is an interdisciplinary group of advocates that are pushing for proactive inspections in order to ensure that all tenants are living in not only affordable housing, but safe and adequate housing, right? I think that's key, that all tenants have the right to have that, and really pushing the idea that housing is a public health issue, right? We want to ensure that everyone's living in safe conditions.
Great, thank you. Kim J.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me on this panel. My name is Kim J. I am a training facilitator and also a training manager, rather, and a senior community health worker with Sinai Urban Health Institute. My main role is to meet clients in the home and reiterate conditions or instructions that the doctors have given them concerning their asthma condition. making sure that they have the things that they need to be okay, and also do home inspections to make sure that what's happening in the home is not making them sicker. And when we do identify some things that are problems, we try to remediate them uh, with the landlord and with the tenant. However, if there is no way to amicably resolve some of those issues, then we elevate it to my fine colleagues on this call, to Susan or Laura, to take over and do their beautiful work in advocating for those who need their support.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim, and all of you for the introductions. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in to some questions that we have elicited from community members, as well as from physicians, providers, others, other community organizations as well. So, okay. So, so we wanted to start off again, as Crystal had mentioned at the beginning, the Chicago Asthma Consortium has developed this Tenants with Asthma, an environmental checklist. Again, this was a nice partnership with the Metropolitan Tenants Organization. And with that, we utilize MTO's 7 principles of a healthy home. And with that, there are definitely certain things that tenants can look for. And, this is definitely a resource that is available on the Chicago Asthma Consortium. But I wanted to ask Kim J. This question: when I am considering a possible new apartment or home, what key things should I look for that may affect my asthma?
Well, as a community health worker, when I would go into the homes of those patients who need those services, or clients, or even those who are looking for a new home, places to live, I would really always encourage them to select a place that does not have carpeting, because carpeting holds a lot of allergens and materials that may cause their asthma to flare up. I also encourage them to check for leaks, and with looking under sinks, checking the bathrooms, even flushing the toilets, to make sure that there's nothing happening there, and make sure that there's proper ventilation and preferably a smoke free environment. Because even though the person who has asthma may not be a smoker, if they're living in a building where smokers are, it can be problemsome for them because that odor does travel. So I really try to encourage them to seek a place out like that, and maybe it's something that's not ground level, because those live in a lot of garden apartments get a lot of issues with mold and mildew and a lot of moisture, and that's not the ideal place. But ideally, someplace that's not carpeted, well ventilated, and leak free and pest free.
Great, thank you.
You hit a lot of points there, Kim. Thank you for that. And can I add too that with that environmental checklist that was created, the original form is actually a 10-page document, and it does share a lot of the tips and advice for how to remediate or deal with any of those triggers that may be in the home. And it also lists what, like Kim was saying, some of the things to look for as for a new home, or even in your current home, some things to look for if you might be noticing that your asthma triggers. Your asthma seems to be triggered a little bit more at certain times. There may be some conditions that are existing in your current home. So that checklist, the original document, full document, is 10 pages, and it addresses many of these principles here, or all of these principles here, to a deeper degree. There's also what we call a RAC card, which is a shortened version of the environmental checklist, and it's intended for a person to carry it with them when they're going to inspect a new home.
And if I might add, a tool that you may not be aware of when you are looking at for a particular apartment, if you have access to a computer, you can access the City of Chicago's webpage and the buildings department. They keep records of inspections. And if you put in the address of the place that you're looking for, you will see a history of inspection results and whether or not the city has ever cited this building for inspection failures. And you can find in there particularly records about pest infestations. I haven't seen anything in there ever about water, stagnant water, or water being present, but they would also include citations for things about the structure that are old or crumbling or need repair. And those are clues that the building is not watertight, and that water may be getting into the unit and then staying there and then contributing to conditions that would lead to mold.
Thank you,
Great.
Susan. That's very, very good information to know. I wasn't aware of that.
Okay, so for our next question, how often should I clean my place to minimize asthma triggers? And what kind of cleaning products should I avoid using? Kim, would you mind taking this question, as I know you have a lot of experience here?
Well, yeah, so um, we do recommend cleaning your house. Well, there can be levels. I say we want to make sure that it's dust free and clutter free, because all these things can contribute to asthma exacerbation. But when we're talking about cleaning the home, daily wiping up things to keep it dust free is good, but a deep cleaning every week is really good. And when we talk about what to clean the apartment with, what products, we typically want you to go with more greener products, maybe white cider vinegar, baking soda, because these are non toxic items that do not cause your asthma to flare up, because most of us, we want to use the bleach, the Fabulosos, or the pine salts to clean our houses, and we don't look at the back of the bottle to say, oh, this is how we're supposed to use it. We just really pick it up and pour it out. But I always would challenge my participants to say, you know what, why don't you just flip the bottle over and see what it says if you're going to use these products. If you use them like they are intended, they won't be as harsh, but if you are not following those directions, they definitely will be a trigger. So we try to migrate people to more of a environmentally friendly product, and we will bring green cleaning kits, which would consist of white cider vinegar, baking soda, Bonami, which is a non-chlorine cleanser. We will bring spray bottles so they can make those cleaners themselves, and also natural oils to help with fragrancing the house. But if people cannot go with that, because people will sometimes push back vinegar, I always tell them that once it dries, you'll never know it's there. But if they give a pushback, I really encourage people to flip the bottle over. And if they look at the instructions, it says 1/4 cup per gallon of water. And we all know we don't do that. We just, pick it up until we feel like, oh, that's enough. But that's really what causes the issue, that we use the products incorrectly, which contribute to asthma exacerbation. But if I had to recommend, it would be more of a natural item. And these are things you can buy if you are having issues with finances. It could be purchased with your link card or your food card, because it's natural products.
Great, thank you. Does any of the other panelists have any other comments or to add to what Kim had mentioned about cleaning?
From a tenant standpoint, is there anything, Laura and Susan, that a tenant can expect from a landlord in terms of how often their building should be maintained or be cleaned?
Well, it is a landlord's responsibility to maintain the property to maintain it, right, to ensure that it's free of pests. That includes rodents and other pests such as cockroaches, which contribute to asthma. If there is an issue with rodents or other pests, bed bugs, etc., then the landlord has a certain amount of time to address that issue. And Susan can speak more on this, because it varies whether it's a subsidized tenant. That's really important when we're giving this advice, right? And they're reaching out to their landlord, whether or not the tenant is subsidized, whether or not the tenant is covered under the residential landlord tenant ordinance. But regardless, the landlord is always obligated to maintain the home and the structure in clean and working order. So
And
that's
so that's
important.
something, yeah,
Mhm.
that's something that tenants should know, that landlords are required to maintain their property on a regular basis.
Yes, and there's certain steps that'll change. For instance, if subsidized housing, always notify the landlord if there's any issue in writing first. If the landlord is unresponsive, then you can escalate if they're subsidized tenants to their respective subsidy to request an inspection. And if they're, covered, they can also reach out to their local alderman to escalate any calls to the city. If they filed a 311 report,
Mm,
they can provide the SR number, the service request number, to the alderman, and usually the alderman will step in and advocate. That's not always the case, but it is important to put everything in writing and to first communicate with the landlord that there is an issue in the building.
thank you.
I could just add one quick thing. Um, Again, from a community health worker's perspective, some of the clients in the communities that we serve are oftentimes afraid to even tell when there's something going on in their apartment when it comes to leaks or some things that require upkeep beyond their measure. They're afraid to talk about it because they think there's going to be some negative connotations behind it. So a lot of tenants who are in these situations with regarding something that needs to be taken care of, be it mold or leaks, they've kept them a secret. And then when it's out of hand, that's when it becomes like the biggest issue that we see. And I've asked questions, why didn't you say anything before? And some of the responses have been, I don't want to get evicted. So a lot of the times we were trying to even intervene to assist, we had to tread very carefully because we still wanted to honor what that tenant wanted to do, but we also wanted to advocate for them, knowing that this is nothing that you caused. This is something that the landlord can do as long as you're vocal about it and let them know. So I just wanted to throw that in there because a lot of times we did run into that people didn't talk about it because they were afraid they were going to be evicted.
I can address that. And I actually have a slide
I have that.
that is related to that question and that concern. I see that a lot too, Kim, in my work. And maybe we need to just, this might be a good way to segue into, I say there on top of this slide, I say RLTO. Well, let's back up maybe a slide or two. I can say what that is. Maybe back up a couple more. Anyways, the RLTO is an ordinance called in Chicago. It's the Chicago Residential Landlord Tenant Ordinance. And it covers all dwellings in the Chicago area, except for a unit in which the landlord also lives, or owner also lives. So if someone's living in their home and renting out a room, then the RLTO doesn't apply. But otherwise, it does apply. And what it contains are the obligations that tenants have and the obligations that landlords have with respect to these rental units. And as you can see here on this screen, I've written what the general obligation is for landlords. And Laura referred to this earlier, but the landlord has an obligation to maintain the premises in compliance with all applicable provisions of the municipal code and shall promptly make any and all necessary repairs to fulfill this obligation. So that's the general structure. The RLTO sets up this obligation using the word shall. The landlord shall maintain and shall make prompt repairs. The way the RLTO is structured, you can see on the next slide, it also has a list of what are considered violations of that landlord obligation. What can a landlord do? What things do landlords do that violate their obligation to maintain? There are a number of things, and we can come back to this slide later because I want to get to that point that Kim made, but there are another specific there's specific language in the RLTO related to things that cause mold. That if the landlord fails to do, then then a tenant has rights to pursue these things. For example, if a landlord fails to keep a unit substantially watertight, that's my second bullet point, then the tenant has a right under the RLTO to get that fixed, to get that building made watertight. And then I understand that a tenant, for using this example of keeping the foundation and walls and roof in such sound condition that they are watertight, tenant might be nervous, as you said, Kim, I see it all the time, to point that out, to point out the leaky roof, to point out the fact that the leaky roof is causing leaks in his or her own unit or making the walls damp. I see that so often. I see wet walls or water damage to walls, and then I see mold on the walls where the water damage is. So to deal with that fear, Chicago, when it wrote this ordinance, anticipated that tenants might be afraid. So let's then go back, please, to that slide you first picked up about retaliation. So you should complain. A tenant should complain. You should follow your right and get the situation fixed. And if the landlord takes action against you, you're protected by this provision, section 512(150). It says a landlord may not knowingly terminate a tenancy, increase rent, decrease services, bring or even threaten to bring a lawsuit for possession, that means go to eviction court, or refuse to renew a lease where a tenant has requested that the landlord make repairs. So make your request, write it exactly as Laura said, put it in writing. And then once you do that, you've triggered this provision in the RLTO that protects you. How would you use that protection? So let's say you complain to the landlord, you send the letter, and then all of a sudden you get a termination notice slipped under your door. Because the landlord doesn't want to fix it. The landlord would rather you move out and somebody else move in who may not know about this issue and may not complain. We see that a lot in Chicago. We see landlords who churn apartments without making repairs, instead seeking to evict a tenant who has complained, and then replace that family with another family that might not complain. Tenants don't know they have this right. So let's say they get that notice of termination. What should they do? They should try to get legal help, is what they should do. They should call us or another organization in the city who then could write a letter. Exactly, Laura, I see you raising your hand. Who could write a letter to the landlord saying, no, you can't do that. Because all Mrs. Smith did was exercise her legal right, and that's retaliation. And a landlord should know, see at the bottom there, that there's damages in this law. Landlord will have to pay for engaging in behavior that's retaliatory. And it's not just a notice of termination that triggers this. I've seen many cases where a tenant complains to the landlord, or where a tenant calls 311 for an inspection, or calls a housing authority if they have a subsidy for an inspection. That's called complaining to a government agency. That's allowed. That's okay. That's what you should do. I've seen landlords who are aware that those calls have been made, or where they know that the city has come to inspect. All of a sudden, your lights might go out unexplained. Maybe in the summer, your air conditioning doesn't work for 2 weeks because the landlord would like you to move, right? They're trying to force you out because otherwise they're going to have to spend a lot of money to make that building watertight or to do those other things. So look for other ways of retaliation that are not just a notice under your door demanding that you move out. There are other things, and they're all protected. They're all protected. And even a tenant who might just have this knowledge but doesn't have access to a lawyer could be encouraged to maybe write their own letter or email. I know that's a tough ask, but the more in the community we know about this, and the more we share this idea and have access to this slide and the citation to the code and what this language is, the more empowering it is. I have seen judges routinely award these damages. They're available, they work. It's often hard to get access to the courts, unfortunately, but this protection is meaningful and it works.
Great, thank you. Laura, I think you had your hand up.
Well, I just wanted, Susan mentioned some of the organizations. So MTO is one of those organizations that can help advocate for the tenant. I want to thank Kim for pointing out that issue. That is definitely something that we see in high need areas, right? Some of the most vulnerable tenants are the ones that struggle the most with having a landlord make those repairs. And unfortunately, the current system places the burden on the tenant to ensure that the repairs are made, right? They have to reach out to the landlord. There's several steps, then reach out to the city. There's a lot of issues with getting inspections, and then hopefully have the city enforce those issues, because the other issue is having the landlord actually held accountable for those violations. So there's a lot of steps in that, and I do want to stress that it can be very taxing on the tenant, right? Particularly those that are already struggling with physical health issues. They can then be burdened with unnecessary mental health issues. So it is important that if it's very difficult, or there's someone advocating on their behalf, be it Kim or someone else in the community, that they reach out to organizations where we can fight that fight for them, right? Or reach out to Susan's group or other legal aid clinics where they're able to do that. But it is important. I do want to stress that they document everything. So all communication in writing. If the landlord promises to fix something, follow up with that conversation in writing, send out, always ask for an address. It's the landlord's legally required to provide a mailing address for correspondence, but a lot of times we're seeing that the tenant isn't given that information, right? You don't know what you don't know, and the tenant might not know to ask for that information when moving into an apartment. So asking for an email or any other way that they can send it via text message, email, just so that it's documented, and then take pictures of everything from beginning to end. Take pictures of what's happening in the situation, videos. That is very helpful to send out, because when you make that 311 report, that service request report, they will allow you to upload documentation, and that's important to have. So always document, even if you're not necessarily reaching out to the landlord or having difficulty with the landlord directly.
And by document, let me just add that make sure there's a date.
Yes.
That means that has to be a date. So if there's a photo you take, it has to be dated somehow. You have to be able to prove you took the photo on a certain day. If you send an email, make sure there's a date on it, and then you're protected.
And I just wanted to ask Laura, isn't there an app that MTO has that allows the tenant, if they start this kind of process, that'll upload those things and date stamp it all, and like keep a nice record for them?
Yes, we utilize Squared Away for our reporting, and that it helps engage the tenant, right? So they're proactive about advocating for themselves, which is something that Susan mentioned as well. But we do understand that not everyone has that ability, right? So we allow them to use that. If they're unable to, we can do that as well for them, or find other resources. But that is all available within the Squared Away app. It even gives sample letters, so they don't have to draft their own letter. They can just take that letter, plug in what's missing, and then send that out to their landlord.
Great. I love how all our questions are actually being answered from your guys's natural just conversation. I think what we'll go ahead and do is get into some of our case-based questions that we received. So I know, Susan, you were starting to already talk a little bit about mold. And so one question we did receive is, the apartment I live in has black mold growing on the bedroom wall. I have reported it to the landlord and they have painted over it, but it has returned. I keep my child with asthma in the living room and have closed off the door, but we could really use the space of the bedroom. Is there anything else I can do besides trying to move? And what can I do if my landlord isn't responding to these concerns?
Well, this taps right into what we've been saying. This is an example where what we've been saying applies. Take photos, this particular tenant's instinct that painting over it is insufficient is correct. Painting over it is going to be further evidence of the landlord's bad faith. So documenting that that's what has been done is a paint over rather than a repair. A paint over is not a repair. Taking photos of the mold and then writing that letter. This is now to answer the question, what are my choices besides moving? Write a letter that demands that the repairs be made. And that attaches the photo following the advice that we were just giving a few minutes ago. That was sort of generic. And if you need help, reach out to Laura's organization or other organizations for how to compose those letters, how to take those photos and demand the repair. You have a basis, I would say, to add into your letter language from the landlord-tenant statute that I had on that slide earlier about the specific things that are required from landlords. So I see in this photo, for example, the mold here, if you've got a picture of stagnant water, maybe in the basement, if you have leaking water in your bathroom, you would want to take photos of that. Anything having to do with stagnant and accumulating water, those are specific requirements in the ordinance for landlords to fix. You might also look at the exterior of the building. Is there mold around your windows too? That's a frequent place water can get in. That would all be very important to document. And then once you've made your letter, if the landlord doesn't make repairs and this is a place you really want to stay, well, then you could look further to retain the help of somebody who provides legal services. And there are organizations like ours where they're free to make a claim against the landlord that for injunctive relief, which means an order from the court requiring the repairs to be made. I've gotten those before. And then a reward of damages for the time that you spent living in these conditions. Also, one more thing to document, I guess, would be any medical records you have with respect to illness caused by these conditions. These are horrible conditions shown in these pictures. And so keep all medical records of doctor's visits for your child, any diagnoses. And it's important to have a relationship with a medical professional on these issues, because it could be that that medical professional will provide very important information to a court at some point, documenting what exactly the damage has been caused by these uninhabitable conditions.
Great, thank you. Laura or Kim, anything to add?
Well, I want to give Laura, if you want to go, you can, or I could just speak to
Sure.
this.
Well, there's a couple points, right? There's a couple, the tenant also, so there's a couple points to remember. Under the RLTO, the tenant, which includes subsidized tenants, there is the option to also repair and deduct or to make a rent reduction. But with subsidized tenants, we have to be careful because subsidized tenants can't make deductions without first consulting with their subsidy. So whether they're voucher holders, Section 8, HUD, et cetera, they do have to first communicate that and ask for an inspection to have those repairs confirmed, right? Those issues addressed. So they cannot withhold rent because it places them at risk of losing those subsidies. But the tenant themselves, if they're saying that and again, this is something that Susan might be best equipped to answer, but the tenant has to, if they decide to make the repair deduct or the rent reductions, be careful as to how much they're deducting, because they could place them at risk for eviction. And again, this falls back to, there's a lot of burden placed on tenants to do the work, right, to address these issues. And MTO alone, and this is not including other organizations, but MTO alone feels last year we were at over 12,000 calls, right? Many of them, the majority of them dealing with retaliation for reporting repairs, having to deal with repairs and other healthy home issues, lockouts, evictions, et cetera. And a lot of this overlaps. We're seeing, again, that the tenant just wants to live in a home that is safe and adequate, and they're advising their landlord that there's an issue, but the landlord isn't willing to make that repair. So they'd rather, or they want to get rid of the tenant through a constructive eviction, what's known as a construction eviction. So they'll allow the building to fall into this disrepair so that the tenant just basically evicts themselves. They'll leave eventually. So that's another issue. So it is important. And I know that there's a 10-page letter and there's more information because there are a lot of steps, and it does vary which ordinance and if they're subsidized or not subsidized. So there's more information we can give, but that'll probably take the whole hour.
And I just want to build on what's already been discussed. These are actually conditions that I would walk into very often in the communities that I served. And in seeing this, it had two factors with this. The mom had like three adult children, well, like 18. The oldest of them was like 22, but then she also had grandchildren that were in there, right? And this house literally had running water from the ceiling in one of the bathrooms downstairs, and rather than, they couldn't turn it off, so they just closed that bathroom door. So the ceiling was literally rotting through. And when I looked to the basement, when I was doing the house inspection, I said, well, let me see what the basement looks like. She said, you can't go down there. And I'm like, why? She threw a cup, and the cup began to float in the basement. And I'm like, oh my God, you guys can't live like this. And she was like, well, I'm afraid where my children are going to go. So this was an instance when I did have to pull in MTO as a partner in this, getting this taken care of, because this mom was like at her wit's end, because she told the landlord, who was, a man of the cloth, but he did not do any of the repairs that need to be made to this house. So our great partner MTO got involved with us, and they helped to get not only this place taken care of, as far as really they had to move out because it was beyond repair, but they had to pay to have this mom and these children relocated because of what they were experiencing in this apartment. And it was really horrific to see that they were trying to really move out their everyday life and live in this place. Asthma exacerbated. Though there's a baby in a walker there, and I'm like, this is crazy. So what I had to do I'm going to say as an advocate in community, was to make people aware that these services that are out here are available for you, and don't be afraid to take advantage of these services, because it's not above you. It's not like it's denied to you. This is a service that has been set up to protect you. So a lot of what I have done too is just to educate and make people aware that you do not have to live in conditions like this, that there are people out here that will fight for you, not just me, but other people in higher places that are attorneys like Susan, that work at MTO like Laura, who would do these things and fight on their behalf. And they are not a team of one, but a team of many. So it's about, once you know information, share it and make it readily available, so the community feels empowered to be able to say something about the conditions that they've been living in these buildings that on the outside look beautiful. When you walk into them, it's a trap. It's a health trap. So a lot of it was just letting people know that you have rights, and let me show you. And that's what a lot of that was. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kim, for sharing that. That was that's a really powerful story, and good example of utilizing some of these community resources
That are free by chance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have time for one more question. And I think this is a question I get a lot from my patients. that have asthma. And one is, what can be done about odors, like particularly smoke, whether it be cigarette or others, that could seep into their apartment and into people's apartments from other parts of the building. Again, I know a lot of my patients, their asthma gets exacerbated by these strong odors, and it's very frustrating, and they feel that their landlord might not know, would be able to do anything. But I just wanted to see if what you guys have run into regarding that. So I'll start with Laura. Do you have any comments?
The first thing is to check the lease to see if smoking is allowed in the building. As mentioned previously, it's really important to move into a building to ask those questions. Are there smokers in this building, right? Check for smells. If it's not, then to write to the landlord and ask that, a lease violation be given, or a talk, right? Don't want to displace anyone else in the building, but to encourage that conversation between the landlord and the tenant that's violating that lease. We don't want to encourage the tenant to necessarily have that conversation with another tenant. It could escalate, and we don't want that to occur. So we want to be careful. But again, all of this has to be communicated with the landlord in writing. Again, unfortunately, we do see a lot of lack of options, right? This, as Susan mentioned, this can be escalated through the courts, but it is a lengthy process. Unfortunately, Department of Buildings has to triage all of the calls that they get, and smoke in the building isn't high on the priority list. It's not to dismiss the urgency of the matter, is just the reality, right? Coupled with the pandemic, there's a lot going on, and it's inspectors are dealing with lack of heat, other structural issues, other problems. And so this is something that you'd first talked with your landlord about. You'd write a letter, let them know that in the lease it says it's a non-smoking building, and you'd like to have that lease provision enforced. That would be the first step in that.
Great. Susan, do you have anything to add?
I would only add that sometimes there may be a non-smoking provision and you don't know it because it's often in a rider. A rider is an extra piece of paper added on to your lease. So there's a standard lease that may say nothing about smoking, but there's been a separate document added on. There are also other kinds of separate documents. Oops, I'm sorry. Can you hear me still?
Yes, we can.
I'm sorry about that. So I would just encourage the person to inquire if they don't see anything about smoking in their lease, to inquire if there was a rider and they weren't aware of it, or because it still might be there. We do get lots of folks call us because they've gotten a notice that they're smoking and they're going to be evicted. So I do actually think that this is an issue that many landlords and property managers do want to act on. Many do want their buildings to be smoke-free. And as I loved Laura's point of, let's not escalate this to that point where someone else's housing is at risk. Let's just try to nip it in the bud and get it taken care of.
Great. Kim, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I would say on that note about, not escalating things, what are some real-time options they can do within their apartments? And a couple of suggestions that I would give for people that were in this moment and were asking. There are vent covers that you can buy that can go over there to filter the air. Also, I always would encourage clean air time, where they can open their window to allow fresh air in, because a lot of our community members were not comfortable with opening windows because of crime. But I would encourage them to open the windows and let some fresh air in to circulate that. And also within the venting system, like where the radiators, not the radiator, but where the heaters are, they can ask for a heftier quality filter to help filter out some of those things. But these are like some real time things that people needed help with in the moment. And these are some things that they could do. And these vent covers, like little sheets that you can buy that goes over the vent, to help filters out some of that those odors that may come in as a result of living in an apartments and buildings where you're surrounded by other energies that do other things that are not really what you do. So these are some things we would do, and also encourage cleaning with the vinegar and equal parts vinegar and water, because it does take odor out of the area. You can even put it in a spray bottle and spray the furniture with it as your own version of Febreze without branding something. So we would offer some green cleaning tips on how to eliminate odor, but realistically, they could buy some vent covers that cover the vent and help filter out some of those things.
Great, thank you. Okay, I just want to definitely, again, thank our panelists for such a wonderful discussion about tenants living with asthma and what to do when looking for place and what to do if there are any issues. Again, thank you so much.